Campaign rhetoric. The nominees respond to a new report about Donald Trump's taxes. Debate prep. The vice presidential contenders set to meet in Virginia. Jason Calvi is there tonight. Another Airborne Papal News Conference. The Pope decries harmful teaching on gender issues. And peace deal rejected. Why the people of Colombia voted against it and what it means moving forward. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 3rd, 2016. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Donald Trump pushes to repeal the Johnson Amendment. It threatens churches with the loss of tax-exempt status if pastors preach politics from the pulpit.
One of the things I will do very early in my administration is to get rid of the Johnson Amendment so that our great pastors and ministers and rabbis and everybody and priests and everybody can go and tell and can participate in the process.
It should be clarified Catholic priests cannot use their homilies to endorse political candidates. They try instead to help parishioners learn about key moral issues, forming their consciences accordingly. New York's Attorney General orders the Trump Foundation to immediately stop fundraising in the state because it's not properly registered. The Trump campaign says the foundation intends to cooperate with the investigation. It has previously called Attorney General Eric Schneiderman a partisan hack who has endorsed Hillary Clinton for president. The presidential campaigns respond to a New York Times report that nearly $1 billion in business losses reported by Trump may have allowed him to avoid paying federal income taxes for years. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports tonight.
The Trump campaign says he paid hundreds of millions of dollars in other taxes. That includes property and real estate taxes. But he did not directly deny the Times reporting on the federal income tax. Hillary Clinton says Trump's 1995 tax returns, quote, confirm he's a business failure. Reporting from the White House, I'm Lauren Ashburn, EWTN News Nightly.
And Lauren, Hillary Clinton keeps up the attack on the campaign trail in Ohio today.
You know, Trump represents the same rigged system that he claims he's going to change. The whole story tells us everything we need to know about how Trump does business.
Clinton called for legislation requiring presidential candidates to release their tax records. Mike Pence and Tim Kaine meet in Farmville, Virginia tomorrow night for their first and only vice presidential debate. Jason Calvi takes us there tonight. Jason?
Brian, Farmville is exactly what I was expecting. It's surrounded by farms. They have an historic downtown area. We're here at Longwood University, a school of about 5,000 students, and it's right here that Mike Pence will face off against Tim Kaine tomorrow night.
So what can we expect during this debate?
Well, Brian, we don't know what the topics will be, so the candidates really need to be prepared for everything. We do know that Mike Pence has called himself Rush Limbaugh on decaf, and Tim Kaine has said he's boring, but we still do expect some fireworks right behind me tomorrow, Brian.
Do you have any indication what they might say?
Well, both of the candidates have talked freely about their faith on the campaign trail. Tim Kaine has talked about being a missionary in Honduras, whereas Governor Pence has talked about being a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. He's also called for the defunding of Planned Parenthood, whereas his opponent, Tim Kaine, has 100% approval rating with that organization, Brian.
What else can we look forward to?
Well, it'll be a chance for both nominees to really speak to the American people, to show themselves to the American people. A new AP poll finds that 50% of American voters don't know enough about Tim Kaine to make a decision about him, and 44% of Americans don't know enough about Pence to make a decision about him. But Pope Francis has given guidance to Catholic voters in the United States today. He says that Catholics should study the issue, they should pray, and then they should vote their conscience. We'll have exclusive coverage right here at Longwood University. We'll be giving you a little bit more on their faith tomorrow night, and then we'll be in the spin room. We'll bring you that story Wednesday with exclusive coverage from the spin room right here at Longwood University. Brian?
Jason Calvi, Farmville, Virginia. We look forward to your coverage. Thank you, Jason. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Pope Francis speaks out against what he calls the wicked push of gender theory in schools. Mary Shovlin joining us with more from Rome. And Mary, what did the Holy Father say, and what was the
Pope
context?
Francis drew the distinction between ministering to transgender Catholics and what he called the nasty indoctrination of children in schools towards gender theory. This is something that Pope Francis has brought up several times throughout his pontificate, including on some of his recent trips. We know that, for example, he denounced, even in his own Argentina, that some schools only receive assistance if they're willing to espouse this gender theory. And he called this also one of the greatest threats to marriage today when he mentioned a war that's happening on marriage today, gender theory being one of the greatest threats to the union between a man and a woman, as he said, as God intended it in creation. And he warned us all to be wary of the ideological colonization that could be taking place.
Mary, the Holy Father often refers to that. What is ideological colonization?
Well, this is a phrase that he used, Brian's. Ideological colonization means that maybe you're a developing country, or maybe you're just an individual person without a lot of power, but the idea that the ideas you espouse, the assistance you'll receive or not receive is contingent upon you espousing certain theories, even though they may go against your moral beliefs. We've seen this happen to countries in Africa, for example, conditioned to be let into the UN. So these things are happening again and again, and Pope Francis is on the front line to say, beware of that. Don't compromise your moral beliefs.
Mary Shovlin in Rome. Thank you, Mary. And Pope Francis gives his blessing to opening the cause for sainthood of the French priest slain during Mass in July. The Holy Father told reporters Sunday he is authorizing the gathering of witness testimony to determine if a beatification cause is warranted. The Vatican usually requires a 5-year waiting period before investigators begin. The Pope says he authorized the earlier start since witnesses might die or forget over time. Father Jacques Hamel was killed July 26th at his parish church in Normandy. Police killed the assailants and the Islamic State group claimed responsibility. That Normandy church where Father Hamel was slain reopened Sunday for the first time since the attack. A special cleansing ritual was held. The Archbishop of Rouen led a procession to the church calling for tolerance across religions. Pope Francis praises Azerbaijan as a place of religious tolerance in a region divided by violent extremism. The Holy Father met with Muslim, Jewish, and Orthodox leaders during his 10-hour visit to the country's capital on Sunday. He also celebrated Mass with one of the world's smallest Catholic populations, known for its good relations with different faith groups. He did not mention allegations from the West of the human rights abuses in that Asian nation. The day before in Georgia, Francis visited the leader of the Georgian Orthodox Church, calling for improved relations. Georgia is overwhelmingly Orthodox. Catholics represent less than 3% of the population. The Pope also said Catholics should not seek to convert Orthodox, calling them brothers and sisters, children of the same God. During the Pope's flight back to Rome, he talked about next year's papal trips. The pontiff says he'll visit Portugal and is almost sure he'll go to India and Bangladesh. He says he also may go to Africa, but didn't say exactly where. The Holy Father puts his visit to Colombia on hold after voters there reject a peace deal between the government and rebel guerrilla forces. Wyatt Goolsby is here with that story tonight.
Brian, peace is anything but certain in Colombia right now. The country has essentially been in a civil war for 5 decades, and after a razor-thin vote against the peace deal, it's clear the country is divided.
The margin was less than 1%, but on Sunday, the Colombian people rejected a peace deal between the government and the rebel group known as FARC.
We would have hoped for a different result.
World leaders hope the country will not descend into violence. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is dispatching a special representative to Cuba, which is helping facilitate the peace talks.
I witnessed the profound desire of the Colombian people to end the violence. I count on them to press ahead until they achieve secure and lasting peace.
A que decidieran si respaldaban o no.
The no vote is a major setback for Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos, who still vows to keep a ceasefire in place and bring an end to a half-century of war. Colombians overwhelmingly loathe the FARC, which the U.S. considers a terrorist group. In the last 52 years, the communist-led guerrilla group has reportedly killed 220,000 people and driven almost 8 million from their homes.
Sabemos que nuestro reto como movimiento político.
FARC leader Timoyan Jimenez says the loss is a step back, but not a definitive defeat. Jimenez and Santos celebrated the peace agreement in a ceremony last week, but that was before voters weighed in, many voicing concern that terrorists would not be held responsible for past crimes.
Injustice brings more war. The only thing we want is justice. That's all we're asking for is justice.
Former Colombian President Alvaro Uribe is urging the government to return to the negotiating table. He was one of the chief opponents of the deal with FARC. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt. Ana Kanchana is a policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation. I was surprised. Why did the Colombians vote this down?
Well, I mean, overwhelmingly, we saw in polling beforehand that the Colombian people were very skeptical of the terms of the deal, right? I mean, in theory, we all want peace, but the terms of the deal, which granted FARC immunity for many crimes, which allowed the FARC to become a political party, was just too much for them to vote in support of the deal.
So would you agree with those who say that it was really de facto amnesty for the FARC?
Well, that's what it would turn into, right? So the Colombian government was now creating a new system. It was called transitional justice. They were creating new courts and allowing the FARC to not go through with the traditional systems of justice, and essentially they would not have had to serve jail time, and crimes would be reclassified as political crimes, and it is de facto amnesty.
This group has been considered a terrorist organization. This has been going on for 50 years. What other issues might have played into this rejection by the voters?
Well, I guess the main issue was the political participation, but again, it was Cuba and Venezuela being guarantors of the peace process. These are countries that have been longtime allies of the FARC, and it wasn't the skepticism behind Cuba and Venezuela actually playing a constructive role. Again, that undermined the agreement, and also it was the lack of faith that the people had in the Colombian government. Many attributed this referendum to kind of be a referendum on President Santos, who has essentially linked his legacy to the pursuit of peace with the FARC.
What can they do next? Is this thing dead now?
No, it's not dead. They're going to go back to the drawing table and kind of go back to renegotiate the more controversial pieces. But I do think that they will come to a peace. I mean, it's been 4 years that they've gone through these negotiations, and they've gone through significant hurdles. And I mean, the vote was only lost yesterday by 54,000 votes. So it was very close. So I think they are close to coming to a deal that the majority of Colombians can agree to.
It sounds like it wouldn't take much to get the people in agreement with it.
No, not at all.
Ana Kanchana with the Heritage Foundation. We always appreciate you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Coming up, the evenly divided Supreme Court begins a critical new session. And what could happen to Christians when Iraq liberates Mosul from ISIS? Rough waters ahead of Hurricane Matthew claim the lives of 2 Haitian fishermen. Matthew is expected to make landfall on Haiti tomorrow, passing close to Jamaica, which is already experiencing flooding. People in Florida urged to closely follow Matthew's path and be prepared. Meteorologists say it's too early today to tell how Florida's weather will be affected. Thanks for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. The Supreme Court clears its docket of hundreds of cases on its first day back in session. The justices dismissed hundreds of appeals which accumulated over the summer months. The cases span the range of issues as diverse as immigration to the death penalty. For the first time in 25 years, the court started a term at less than full strength with only 8 justices. Cardinal Donald Wuerl greeted Chief Justice John Roberts in Washington Sunday after the annual Red Mass. It is celebrated for judges and attorneys ahead of the Supreme Court term. The homilist said those involved in the law should seek justice and mercy. Justices Clarence Thomas and Anthony Kennedy, as well as Attorney General Loretta Lynch, attended. British Prime Minister Theresa May offers the first clear date for the start of the Brexit process. At the Conservative Party's annual conference, she promised to trigger the break from the European Union by the end of March. That's when formal negotiations to leave the EU would begin. This date is critical to European and business leaders across the world who must prepare to deal with a post-EU Britain. The expected liberation of Mosul from ISIS control may not end the threat to Christian refugees in Iraq. New challenges will likely await those who try to return home. Nina Shea with the Hudson Institute Center for Religious Freedom joins us. What might Christians face if they try to return to Mosul?
Christians are worried that the refugees coming out of Mosul, refugees from the offensive that we're helping with to liberate the town from ISIS, will come out into the Nineveh plains and claim land that is vacant and undefended that used to be inhabited by the Christians before ISIS arrived. So they're very concerned about the competence of the International Commission for Refugees, the High Commissioner's Office for Refugees. This is a UN agency that's in charge of setting up new camps for these new wave of refugees. They could number, Brian, between 1 million and 2 million people, all over virtually overnight, flowing out of Mosul into the Nineveh plains and entrenching themselves into the Christian towns. And the Christians now are displaced. They're refugees themselves from ISIS from 2 years ago, living in Kurdistan. They will be precluded from ever returning to the land if that takes place. So we're all watching this very closely, very, very concerned. The High Commissioner for Refugees really blew it on Fallujah. Only 85,000 refugees were involved coming out of Fallujah. They had no place to sleep. They were sleeping for a week on the sand without much water, without much food, without baby formula. So what will they do with 1 million or 2 million refugees?
So getting back to the Christians, will they ever feel safe in their homeland in that region again?
Well, you know, I think that they are safe in Kurdistan where they are because the Kurds are protecting them. But they do not have a force equal to the terrorists. They do not have the counterterrorism training or equipment to deal with it. So I'm very concerned about who will protect them. The Patriarch also of the Chaldeans, Patriarch Sako, is warning that there are thousands, maybe millions of hidden landmines in this area that needs to be cleared in the people's homes, in the towns, in the streets, in the fields. And some Christians have already been killed trying to plow their field a couple years ago when they went back prematurely. So by these landmines. So they need help with that. There's lots of hurdles.
So Mosul hasn't even been liberated yet, and if and when it does get liberated, you've got all these hurdles.
All these hurdles, yeah. So I think that for the immediate future, I think we're going to see the Christians in Kurdistan for the most part. Most of the Christians in Iraq now are in Kurdistan.
We thank you for that clearer picture. Nina Shea with the Hudson Institute.
Thank you, Brian.
Up next, religious freedom. A woman is told she can't pray in her own home, and the Pope defends the importance of marriage.
Oh my God, stop.
On October 3rd, thanks for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. A Catholic former nurse says she was told by police she couldn't pray in her own Kansas home. Ken Klukowski is senior counsel for First Liberty Institute, representing Mary Ann Souse. This seems like an obvious violation of First Amendment rights here, Ken.
Well, that's exactly right. The Constitution allows, Brian, for police to have broad authority when they're engaged in investigative stops, when they're conducting a lawful search, when they're executing a search warrant. I mean, police safety and the ability of a police officer to be able to manage a scene where they are lawfully acting, that's an important part of the law. But the reality is those are Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment issues. The First Amendment is on equal grounds as part of the supreme law of the land. And when you have a woman, obviously in a distressed situation, I mean, there are police involved, and a woman is beginning to pray in the privacy of our own home, there is no law enforcement justification that the First Amendment allows the police officer to order a woman, you may not pray in this situation. It's never justified under the Constitution. It's a violation of religious liberty.
What's your next step here in her defense?
Well, the next step is actually moving forward with litigation. I mean, there are remedies at law for situations exactly like this. I mean, the Constitution here, the First Amendment, you have both free speech rights and religious liberty free exercise rights. Those were just trampled upon in this situation. And so a federal civil rights lawsuit is how you vindicate the rights of an American citizen whose rights have been violated in this fashion.
Is this an isolated incident, or are we seeing more of it?
I would hope it's an isolated incident. I've never worked on a case like this previously. It's the first one of this nature that I've seen. We are finding that as a broader pattern, as cases of this nature become more public, Other individuals are encouraged to speak out, but as to whether this is in fact a truly isolated incident, as I would hope, or if in fact there are others out there like it, that's what we may find out as this case goes forward. Our focus right now is on our clients' rights, the fact that with all due respect to law enforcement, those rights were violated here, and both police and civilian, all of us need to abide by the law.
From the First Liberty Institute, Ken Kuklowski, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brian.
Pope Francis defends marriage, praising its benefit to society. Earlier, I asked EWTN senior contributor Dr. Matthew Bunson about the Pope's comments to reporters on the flight back to Rome Sunday.
Yeah, well, the Holy Father, as he often does, uses a trip into a particular place to give a universal message. And he had two messages in his trip to Georgia and Azerbaijan about marriages. The first was that there is a global war against marriage. In other words, there is a concerted effort globally to destroy marriage as an institution and as a sacrament. But more positively, he spoke very powerfully, eloquently about the beauty of marriage, about how marriage itself was, as he put it, one of God's greatest creations, because man and woman were made in the image and likeness of God. So that is both a negative, a concerning, a warning, but also a very positive restatement that we can now carry forward as we try to project a more powerful, beautiful image of marriage across all of culture.
He also discussed transgender issues, even warning against media spin, right?
Yes. I think what we're seeing here is Francis finally being aware of the way that the media takes so much of what he says and spins it, twists it, manipulates it. So Pope Francis warned them, I don't want to be reading about this tomorrow that you've spun what I've said. But he also cautioned the reporters to read Amoris Laetitia, his apostolic exhortation on family and marriage. Because he said if you take a look at the whole document, this beautiful, eloquent statement again, on marriage and on the sacrament and family life, you'll see a total picture of family life, not just the snippets and tidbits that the press likes to focus on.
They've been focusing on Chapter 8, which has the more controversial issues.
Right.
He's saying, read the whole thing.
Read the whole thing. It's very simple, and it doesn't take you that long.
All right, so Pope Francis speaking to reporters aboard the plane, always some good discussion areas there. Dr. Matthew Bunson, we always appreciate your insight. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
And we appreciate each of you. For our EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight with the Our Father sung in Aramaic by an Orthodox choir in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. This happened during the Pope's visit this weekend. Good night and God bless.